Hey, I'm Kristen Anderson. My pronouns are she, her, and this is our January Read This. And today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the most popular books of 2024. So for this, instead of like last month, we talked about award winners and books that, highfalutin folks who read a lot of fiction think are the best books of the year. This is where I'm going to tell you the books that you thought were the best books of the year, and you did that by checking books out from the library. So these are all the books that were the most popular books at JCLS from our locations during 2024. And there's always an interesting, like when you talk about these kinds of numbers, like keep in mind that it is tied to publishing cycles somewhat. So for example, Louise Penny is never going to be on this list. Louise Penny is hugely popular at JCLS, but Louise Penny publishes in November. So the circulation, the big spike in circulation over books spans 2 years, whereas a book that comes out in the spring or in the summer is going to have time to hit the best circulated lists. Also tied to how many books we buy, but how many books we buy is tied to demand. So it's a really nice metric, and it's an interesting way to look at over the course of the year what these books are that people in our community are reading. I'm going to start with adult fiction. And the top circling item of the year in adult fiction is The Women by Kristen Hanna. That is a fictional account of Vietnam, and as the story tells, as the title makes clear, the women who were there supporting their husbands in during the Vietnam War. And that's been hugely popular. Kristen Hanna always is. We even had her last book is also on the list further down, but we're not going to get that far down because we got a lot of titles to cover in a lot of different categories. The second most circulated fiction title of the year is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. Talked about James McBride last month because he just won the Library of Congress. Well, in the summer, he won the Library of Congress Prize for Fiction. And that is another historical fiction piece set in the United States. Really worth checking out. Number 3, we also talked about last month. That one is James, which is a retelling of Huck Finn from Jim's point of view by Percival Everett, and that is the 3rd highest circling book of the year. So there you see like Heaven and Earth Grocery Store and James are both like books that were both received very well critically, but also incredibly popular. Our 4th most circulated book of the year is Remarkably Bright Creatures, which is by Shelby Van Pelt. It's one of those books that comes up in kind of comforting, heartwarming reads. There are one of the characters is an octopus it's set in the Pacific Northwest, who's in an aquarium and develops a relationship. And I know that this sounds far-fetched when I talk about it in front of a camera, but it works fairly organically on the page in the context of the novel, where the story of the octopus and the story of the humans get juxtaposed against each other in a nice way. Number 5 is Table for Two by Amor Towse. And that is a short story collection and has been really read by a lot of the people who loved Gentleman in Moscow. And I think that the people I've talked to didn't like it as much as Gentleman in Moscow, but did enjoy it. And it's been incredibly popular this year. Moving on to nonfiction, the most circulated nonfiction is tied to a movie release, and that is Killers of the Flower Moon, the Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann, which has continued to circulate. It was on the most circulated of last year as well. It's been around for a while, circulating because of the movie. Number 2 in nonfiction is The Demon of Unrest, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War by Eric Larson. And it is the story of kind of the months at the beginning of the Civil War as the southern states are seceding and Fort Sumter. The third most circulated nonfiction book of the year is The Anxious Generation, How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt. That book talks a lot about kind of the mental health crisis in the up and coming generations, and about kind of the transition from physical play in young children kind of being subsumed by phones, but also what is a real crisis of mental health in our country, with suggestions about what to do about it. And that's been on the bestseller list all year and also circulating madly at our libraries. Number 4 is The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder, which is from the age of exploration, kind of an Antarctic seaborne adventure, also by David Grann. So you've got this, and this is the more recent of David Grann's books, but you've got, he also wrote Killers of the Flower Moon. So he is very popular in circulation right now. Number 5 on our most searched nonfiction of the year is The Backyard Bird Chronicles by Amy Tan. Most of us know Amy Tan as a fiction writer, but around 2016, she started this process of kind of being more reflective and doing backyard bird watching. And so this is illustrated and thoughtful nonfiction piece that she has written over the last handful of years. And I'm going to go one deeper on nonfiction. Number 6 is Outlive, The Science and Art of Longevity. That's also one that's been, as has The Backyard Bird Chronicles, been on the New York Times bestseller list all year. But it is by Peter Attia, and the subtitle kind of tells you what it's about. So books about longevity and our health and well-being and lives. And then I wanted to move on to teen. And in teen and children's, I saw some interesting trends that I think are just interesting to talk about in terms of what's popular and what's circulating in libraries, which is different than what's selling in bookstores. So in libraries, what we're seeing, and what I can see looking at the list of the top 5 circling nonfiction titles, is the importance and the life of series fiction and the first book in the series, because that's what this is a list of. And they're not like books that came out this year. They're books that are often in established series, but the first one keeps checking out. And that is great for libraries, but it's also like, that's why we need to keep buying some of these books, because they get grubby and they get lost. We need to make sure we're replacing first in series. And we do that, we work hard on that. So the first one is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. As you could probably guess by looking at the cover and hearing the title, this is a mystery series, and it has been incredibly popular. The number 2 circulated teen book is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is a Hunger Games prequel by Suzanne Collins. And that's the story of, it's been made into a movie. It is the story of the primary villain in the main Hunger Games trilogy, and has been circulating like crazy. In addition, we've got Powerless by Lauren Roberts, also a first in series. You can tell by looking at the cover that it's a romantasy. And in addition, you've got Cruel Prince by Holly Black, also first in series. That's the Folk of the Air series. It's been around for a while. Again, just these first books in series circulate. Also, The Lightning Thief, that's Percy Jackson. And a classic that's been around for a really long time, The Giver by Lois Lowry, often assigned in a classroom setting, which may be part of the reason, but also it is a book that if you've if you've not read it, there's a reason that it has continued to be a popular book. It's one of those things that seems to speak to new generations in different ways, but continues to be a dystopian fiction that is popular and doesn't lose, like, I don't know, Fahrenheit 451, for a modern reader who that doesn't feel like science fiction anymore. The Giver doesn't date like that. It doesn't feel dated. And the only one that's not part of a series in teen most circulated is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. Its cover looks like a fantasy. It is not a fantasy. It is a mystery with a little bit of magic realism. Indigenous writer, just a really, really good mystery. And I think that just speaks to the quality of that book and that it continues to circulate via word of mouth. Somehow my children's fiction is curtailed on my notes, but I'm going to just do it off the top of my head because I remember children's, we see not just the first in series, we see what series are popular. So the most circulated books in children's fiction of the year are All the Captain Underpants and All the Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and with the first book in Magic Treehouse and the first book in the I Survived series thrown in for good measure. So these books that have been popular for years and years and years continue to be popular. Again, the newest Diary of a Wimpy Kid comes out in November, so we don't have the first book or the most recent book in Diary of a Wimpy Kid on this list, but most Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and I think 100% of the Captain Underpants are on the list. Those books just continue to be popular. And I thought, as an interesting little ending, over the summer of 2023, there was a lot of talk of Barbieheimer, and those are the two most circulated DVDs of the year at JCLS for 2024. Oppenheimer won, Barbie is second, but those were our most circulated DVDs of the year. Anyway, it's really interesting and fun to kind of see how the community votes, as it were, on what are their most preferred books of the year. And so I have fun combing through these numbers. And again, we've got lots of end of year lists, including the lists of most popular in a little bit more detail. You'll see in fiction that there are, in addition to the ones that I shared, David Baldacci, Lee Childs have books that are like, I didn't figure that talking about book umpty-ump in a big long series, if you haven't already found that series, would compel you to start reading the series. So I just kind of skipped over the big series titles. But if you want to see which titles those are, you want to go to the end of the year lists and look for the most circulated of the year. And that should do it for our end of year wrap up for 2024. We'll see you next month.